And good evening, everybody. Welcome into the Nittany Lion Sports Report weekly here on Bob Long Sports, and now live on Facebook Live, as well as Periscope on Twitter. Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus alongside. Tyler, we are into the new age here of the Nittany Lion Sports Report, channeling all the new mediums. We're excited to be here, and Penn State excited to roll into the bye 6-0, and we'll talk a lot about the offensive and defensive awards this year for Penn State. We'll talk about the top 10 as Penn State now unveiled as the number 3 team in the country. Very exciting, of course, for Penn State fans, and important as really we start to look forward now into the toughest part of the schedule for this Nittany Lions team. They're going to play at home against Michigan on October 21st. That game announced as a 7:30 kick. And then Ohio State on the road on October 28th, and Michigan State that first weekend of November. That'll also be on the road. Huge win for Sparty over Michigan, and that vaulted the Spartans up to number 21 in the country. I happen to have a big problem with that, and we'll talk about that over the course of the show. And Oklahoma out of the Big 12, and a big top 10 opponent for many of these teams, and of course the team that beat Ohio State. Now that, again, has ripple effects throughout all of college football. But Tyler, first of all, great to have you back, and hope you're excited to be doing this as we head into the bye week.
Happy to be back, Bob. 6-0. Nice little break here for the team. No break for us, unfortunately.
No rest for the weary.
No rest for the weary. That is right. Ready to get into things.
We'll also talk a little bit about my trip to Gainesville, Florida last weekend. Phenomenal time. Took the opportunity to go somewhere else and experience a new atmosphere. So big shout out to Alex Krastowski and Kevin McLaren, as well as Pat Hanneman, who took that trip with me. And we'll have some Tom Petty audio live. Well, not live, but it was taken live from the swamp. Obviously, Tom Petty. Well, it wasn't obvious to me when I got down there, but I found out pretty quickly that Tom Petty, a Gainesville native, and the folks down there certainly love him. But let's jump right into it. We're going to talk Penn State awards, and I think when we talk about the offensive MVP, the answer is going to likely be Saquon Barkley. I don't know if you have a different answer there. So we'll talk about the MVP on the offensive side of the ball, not named Saquon Barkley. Tyler, I'll go to you.
I'm going to go a little off the edge here, and I'm going to go Deshawn Hamilton, actually, for Penn State. Very quiet year, statistically a little bit, but he's making some pretty big plays. 22 catches, 366 yards. He's averaging 16 yards per catch. He also has 4 touchdowns. He's not going to do anything flashy that's really going to catch your eye. He's probably got the best hands on the team. He comes up with big plays time in and time again. I would go with Deshawn Hamilton. I expect a big second half of the season from him as well. Again, nothing flashy. He's not going to beat you for many deep balls, but he catches pretty much everything thrown to him. They rely on him. He's a redshirt senior. So I look to see him continue to progress throughout this season.
All right, I'll go Trace, right down the center of the fairway there. Trace Mcsorely, the quarterback of the team, and the reason I want to talk about him, Tyler, is because it's what we've discussed at length over the course of this show. We come into the season, and there is concern in the Nittany Lion fan base, the Nittany Nation, that Trace Mcsorely is not completing enough balls, throwing under 60%, and he's taking too many deep shots, and he thinks, they think that he might be in a spot where he's taking too many chances, was the beneficiary of having Chris Godwin last year, and now maybe that might not be the case. Well, Joe Moorhead implements an offense where there's a lot of 10, 15-yard passes down the middle. Trace has been very accurate there. He came into the game against Northwestern, Tyler, throwing 65% from the field, and then he goes on to set a program record 15 consecutive completions during the span of that game. So Trace Mcsorely, I think, doing a great job. If there is one thing that I think he has been, and the word is not exposed, but hasn't been as successful as he could have been, I think it's on RPOs when he does decide to pull that ball. But I think a big portion of the reason is the last 3 weeks you've seen elite linebackers chasing down, and really more so Indiana and Iowa, chasing down Trace Mcsorely when he does in fact pull that ball. And while Trace is a good athlete and fairly fast, a really strong outside or middle linebacker will have the speed to chase him down if he has a step or two on them off the jump. And if there's one thing that he hasn't, I wouldn't even say not being as successful, but one thing he hasn't excelled at to the level that maybe folks might expect, it's actually his ground game, not his passing game.
Totally agree with you. I mean, on Saturday at Northwestern, I mean, apparently the wind was a big issue, 25-mile-per-hour winds. I mean, he was throwing absolute darts out there in the wind, no interceptions on the day. I think he threw for 270-something maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong. One touchdown, protected the ball. I do agree, though. I think that his legs aren't really aren't as strong as – well, I shouldn't say they're not as strong as they were last year, but he just – I think people are just – they're starting to understand what Penn State's going to do, but Mcsorely is going to find other ways to beat the defense, and I think he's doing a great job throwing the ball. In fact, I saw a stat today that he's already well past his halfway stats from last year in every category except actually rushing, I believe, is what I saw.
Yeah.
And I mean, but you got to take everything. I'm all right with it because we know that we can still move the ball on the ground with our running back. And the thing I'm concerned with
Are you sure about that?
Well,
after the Northwestern game, that could be of question. I mean, I say that in jest, of course, but a 53-yard run, 53 of his 75 yards in that game.
Yeah, and I mean, you definitely make a good point, and I think, but Saquon Barkley can catch lightning in a bottle at any time, so he might run. At halftime, he had, I forget how many carries, but 0 yards. And you're like, oh, wow, here we go. Like, what is going on? And then he ends the day with 75, 2 touchdowns, maybe about 18 carries or so. I don't know what his yards per carry was. But, I mean, yeah, the running game has been a little iffy this year. And then you turn around and Barkley's still averaging 217 total yards per game.
Sure.
So,
and listen, in some way you have to credit Northwestern, and I wouldn't say from an overall defensive effort because I didn't think it was a particularly good effort defensively from Northwestern, but they picked their poison, and their poison was single man-to-man matchups on the outside, committing safeties, committing linebackers to the middle, and that's why you saw crossing patterns to Deshawn Hamilton and out routes from Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson, he had another great day. So Northwestern picked the way they wanted to get beat or the way they wanted to defend, and it turned out the way they would end up getting beaten because they would collapse everybody on Saquon Barkley, and they simply would not let him run all over them.
And I remember the announcers saying that Pat Fitzgerald was saying, 26 for Penn State, Saquon Barkley is not going to beat us. We'll let somebody else beat us, and it was Mcsorely through the air, and not to mention the stingy Penn State defense did a fantastic job. But I mean, you got to give Pat Fitzgerald and all these coaches, they're gonna make somebody else beat them, and Saquon can still beat them, but it might not be, the easiest. It might take some time, like it did on Saturday against Northwestern, to break one, and that's what he's capable of. I mean, but one thing on Mcsorely that does it does concern me a little bit is the sacks. We were used to seeing Hackenberg get sacked a lot, and it was people said, "Oh, he's not mobile. It's the offense he's running. It's the offensive line." Well, it was all three of those reasons when Hackenberg was here. The offensive line hasn't played great for Penn State this year by any stretch, but some of these sacks, I think Mcsorely could do a much better job throwing the ball away, and instead of taking these hits and losing 5 to 10 yards on these sacks.
Yeah, I would say that is fair. I don't know that I would necessarily put that as much on Trace because I've seen him be pressured significantly. But one other comment I want to make on the run game, and it does involve Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley. When we talk about this offensive line, and I think we'll get into it as possibly one of our disappointments when it comes to the awards for Penn State, in this case the demerits we'll call it, I think that a big part of the reason, and it's somewhat unsung, is the fact that when you have an RPO offense, it's great because you're making an outside defensive end make a decision, and then the quarterback is in theory going to pull the opposite way, either hand it to Saquon Barkley if he stays put, or pull it if he attacks the running back, right? Which is all well and good. Or McSorley can pull it and throw it over the middle if a linebacker comes up front and that space is vacated. That's why the offense is so dynamic. However, if you think of it this way, when that RPO play is called, the defense, the front seven, does not know what play is coming, right? Run or pass. And guess who else doesn't know? The offensive line. So are you pass blocking or are you run blocking? And I think that has something to do with it, especially when you talk about a line that is somewhat inexperienced, hasn't had an ability to play, more than a couple games altogether continuous, especially with the issues they've had at right tackle. So I think that's something for folks that are watching this right now to keep an eye on. The pass block versus the run block. And when it comes to RPO, a lot of times you are trying to go pure run block, but there are plenty of opportunities for Trace to pull that ball and throw it over the middle, and the offensive line is absolutely aware of that.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I didn't even think of that, Bob, that the offensive line doesn't know if they're run passing or run blocking or pass blocking. But I also think that it seems like a lot of the times that they are doing this RPO, it's like very slow to get started. And by the time Mcsorely makes his decision, okay, I'm either going to hand it off or to Barkley, or I'm going to keep it, or I'm going to fake the handoff and throw it. It seems like the defense is already in his face, and there's not much time. A lot of times they're hitting Barkley or Mcsorely, and the other guy's the one that has the ball. So it's like they're already right there, and it just seems like they don't have enough time to really decide.
And that's a defensive thing, right? Because by design with the RPO, you're usually leaving the weak side defensive end completely unblocked and forcing him to make a decision. But you're right, when it starts to be slow to develop, then that gives that defender actually an opportunity to attack both Barkley and Mcsorely, take his chances, and then usually there's not a lot of momentum when the one has or gets the ball, and the rest of the defense has time to adjust.
Are you surprised Penn State really hasn't thrown many deep balls this year, with that being said?
To some extent, I am. I mean, clearly, right? Chris Godwin was a star, was an NFL-caliber player, and now finds himself in the NFL. But am I surprised? A little bit, because Juwan Johnson was supposed to be the guy. So I'm just not, I don't know the reason for it, honestly.
Maybe we'll see the second half when the season matters most for these guys, hopefully.
Yeah. So we'll continue on here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report. Next up, the newcomer of the year on offense. So I think this is a pretty easy one, but you can go ahead.
Yeah, we talked about this a little before the show. With a lot of starters coming back from last year, there aren't many newcomers. On the offensive line, there are no newcomers besides Will Fries, who slides in sometimes at right tackle, and Connor McGovern went from one of the guard positions to center. So they're only really the newcomers in different positions. But the obvious choice here is Juwan Johnson, like Bob just said, replacing the former Penn State star Chris Godwin. And obviously, for most people, Juwan Johnson jumped onto the scene in the Iowa game, making that last-second touchdown catch for the win. All offseason, he's been praised by the coaches, his teammates as a breakout player. So far this year, he's second on the team in catches with 24, 303 yards, and he has that lone touchdown against Iowa. Fully expect him to be utilized even more the second half of the season. They're going to continue to look to him and Gesicki in the red zone mismatch nightmares. So I really think that our breakout newcomer on offense is going to have a much bigger second half of the season than his first half of the season.
I don't disagree. I think you're exactly right. I think that's the call. Johnson has done a great job and has really become much more comfortable in his route running. Clearly a big, strong guy, has shown the ability to make tough catches and has great hands. Tyler, I think this is where it gets really interesting. And once again, Bob Long here. Tyler Gehlhaus, we're giving the midseason awards for the Penn State Nittany Lions. Appreciate all of our newcomers joining us on Facebook Live here tonight. Brand new medium for us. We're excited about it. As well as on Periscope on Twitter. And, of course, you can always catch us on our Ustream page. Just search Bob Long Sports, or you can get us on the website, boblongsports.com. Defensive MVP. This one is wide open, so I'll let you take it first.
Ooh.
I mean, are you talking secondary, somebody in the secondary, or are you talking somebody on the D-line? I do want somebody specific, but there's so many ways you can go.
Right now, I'm going to target I have two answers for this, if that's okay. I'm going to go defensive backs are my defensive MVP right now. There are too many elite players back there right now and I'm going to single out Marcus Allen for being the team defensive MVP. He has this swag about him. In my opinion, he and Kabin are clearly the vocal leaders on the defensive side of the ball. Marcus Allen is one of my favorite players to watch in college football with his energy, his hard hitting, always creating not necessarily interceptions, only has one career, but forcing fumbles. We all know he blocks kicks pretty well too. But I would say Marcus Allen is my defensive MVP, but the secondary itself is playing at a whole nother level. Granted, there are a bunch of seniors back there. I know a lot of people were very concerned about the cornerbacks, specifically at the beginning of the year when we lost John Reed in the spring to a torn ACL. And right now you have Grant Haley playing the best ball I've ever seen him play. Alongside him on the other side is Christian Campbell, a long, rangy cornerback who is also playing lights out, best ball of his career. And then if the two starters aren't good enough, you can bring in Amani Oruwariye, who has 3 interceptions on the year and has only played in, I think, maybe 4. I think he missed 2 games. He's only played in 4 games, and he's not even a starter. And then even behind them, you have 2 promising freshmen, Lamont Wade and Tyreek Castro-Fields. So in my opinion, the secondary is the defensive MVP at this point of the season.
It's interesting when you talk about Christian Campbell versus Grant Haley. It's who is playing the better ball if you had to pick one. Christian Campbell has 3 more passes deflected, 4 more breakups than Grant Haley does. Grant Haley has 2 interceptions, so an additional interception compared with Christian Campbell. Christian Campbell is usually lined up against the longest and most rangy receiver that the other team has to offer. Think Simi Cobbs against Indiana. However, I think that when you look at the numbers there, I still go with Grant Haley. He's playing just a little bit better. And quite frankly, he's not being thrown to as much. Now, how much is that is because he might not be on Simi Cobbs. He might be on the secondary receiver for an Indiana, for example. I think that's a fair point. And maybe it is 1 and 1A. But Grant Haley is just not allowing separation, right? Defense is not really a numbers game as much as some of the other ones. Now, we can talk about Sharif Miller's 3 sacks and the fact that he has 7 tackles for loss and say, wow, that's unbelievable, and a reason to consider him the George Washington High School graduate for the Penn State defensive MVP. If you're going
graduated
secondary,
from Frankfurt, I think.
Did he? But he went to George.
George Washington. I'll look it up. Go ahead, Bob. Sorry to interrupt.
We'll keep moving. But if I had to pick somebody not in the secondary, I'm going to go with Sharif Miller. And a big part of the reason is because this is a defensive line that was very, very deep coming in and is probably deeper now than we thought it was, save for the Torrance Brown injury. But you've had guys come in. Ryan Buchholz has had a very solid year. Kevin Givens has shown the ability to play either at the tackle spot of the 1 technique or at the 3 technique, depending upon what Penn State needs. The Cothrans have been very well, Parker and Curtis, and they do play a bit of a different brand of ball. But I think that Sharif is probably my overall defensive MVP. And then if I may, I'll go right into the newcomer of the year on the defensive side. And let's give it to Shaka Toney, right on the other side of the 3 technique besides Sharif Miller. Now, we've seen Ryan Buchholz be the starter in every single game, maybe save for Torrance Brown in 1 or 2 before he got injured for the season. But Shaka Toney in somewhat limited action. He's seen action in all 6 games but has not started 1. He has 3 sacks of his own and has just been an absolute menace defensively. Now, I'll get this one right. Imhotep Charter, a Philadelphia school, he's absolutely unbelievable in his redshirt freshman year.
Well, if you don't mind about that Sharif Miller, we're actually both right. He went to George Washington, and then he went to Frankfurt High School. So he actually did a little bit of both. So
there you go.
For our listeners out there from the area, he did go to both high schools.
That's great, and we're both on the money.
It's always a good thing.
So, your defensive newcomer for the Penn State Nittany Lions.
My defensive newcomer, Shaka Toney, is a great pick. I am going to go with a player that Bob just mentioned, Ryan Buchholz. He did get a little time last year. Now he's a redshirt sophomore. Torrance Brown went down to the injury in Georgia State early in that game, the 3rd game of the year. I think that Ryan Buchholz, he's not the best pass rusher, but this is a big boy. I mean, you're talking 6'6", probably about 270 as a defensive end. He does a great job against the run. He can pass rush. It's not his strength, but he does a great job against the run. And Brent Pry said the other day in his in an interview, the defensive coordinator for Penn State, that he might go down as one of the best D linemen ever at Penn State. So
that is some high praise
that
right
is very
there.
high praise. As people like to refer to Penn State as linebacker U, I think the D linemen at Penn State history might have something to say about that, as there are very good defensive linemen that have gone through Penn State, and to get high remarks like that from a defensive coordinator after only starting 3 games is pretty special. But with Shaka Toney, Bob, I don't know about you. I see a little bit of Aaron Mabin in
there
young
you go.
Shaka Toney.
How about that?
You know, he's thin.
Hopefully
you know?
a little bit better at the NFL
Yeah,
level.
and hopefully he's not after his redshirt sophomore season leaving for the pros either, like Mabin.
Right.
But
To be drafted as an outside linebacker when he played at the 3 technique his whole college career. Sure.
I think that Shaka Toney is a huge, pleasant surprise for this team, especially with Torrance Brown going down on the defensive line, because I think right now, if you look at it, Toney and Miller, the 2 Philadelphia products, are the best pass rushers out there right now for this team. So I think that Shaka Toney has found a niche, 3rd and long passing situations. You saw it on Saturday against Northwestern for really, that was his coming out party. And I mean, he stripped Clayton Thorson, and I mean, even when he was all over him on the other passing downs, and so I mean, it's hard for these offensive linemen to be going, you know, against bigger D linemen, and then you bring a quick, fast guy in like that, and he blows right past you. So I think they're both really good picks that we had, and both of them could easily be the defensive newcomer of the year.
No linebackers at all mentioned in the defensive awards. I think Cabinda's done a very nice job. He leads the team in tackles. He has not had necessarily his best 6-game string, but I think he has picked it up, especially Iowa and Indiana. And, of course, Koa Farmer, that guy just loves to blitz off the edge, and he's kind of that hybrid-type linebacker guy, does a lot of good things. Really, really solid linebacking core for this Penn State team this year. All right. So we got through the offense and the defense and everything that's going well with Penn State football. What's the biggest disappointment this year so far, Tyler? 6-0, 31-7 win against Northwestern, hammering Indiana. What is the disappointment?
My biggest disappointment this year is Tyler Davis, the field goal kicker. I don't ever want to blame a game on a kicker. Like, a kicker can win you a game, but a kicker can never lose you a game. I don't know about that, and he hasn't lost them a game yet, but it's kind of like this thing that's sticking around.
There's a lot of fans down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama from the year 2011 that would disagree with you.
It shouldn't have to come down to a kicker, but sometimes it's going to, and don't be surprised if some games, the last 6 games of the season, come down to a kick. I don't know if it's a mental thing with him. I hope it is, and I hope it's something that he can straighten out over the bye week and for these last 6 games. We have a brutal 3-game slate coming up. But, yeah, I mean, last year he was like out of nowhere. I think he missed maybe 1 or 2 kicks all season.
Right.
And this year I think he's floating around 50%. And he was up for like Lou Groza awards at the beginning of the season. And I was really expecting, almost Mr. Automatic from Tyler Davis. This year just hasn't been like that. And he's not missing like 50-plus yarders either. It's like a good amount of them are in that 25 to 35-yard range. So, I mean, he is my biggest disappointment. I hope that he straightens it out for the second half of the season. I think he will. I think that Franklin does a good job of positive reinforcement with these guys, and you have to with a kicker. I mean, you absolutely have to with a kicker. So hopefully that's something that they can change, but they have left a good amount of points off the board. Thankfully for now, it hasn't cost them.
My biggest disappointment, this is a team that has potentially the best running back in college football since Adrian Peterson. You had Tom McShay last weekend on the Northwestern telecast ranking Saquon Barkley and grading him ahead of Ezekiel Elliott, who came out 2 years ago. And yet this is a guy that can't get a single rushing yard net in the first half. The offensive line is a big issue. And that's my biggest disappointment of the year. Should be no surprise. Specifically, the inability for one of 3 guys to earn the right tackle position, whether it's Andrew Nelson, who totally understand, Tyler, he came back from a bad injury last year, is not the same. But Will Fries and Chaz Wright have also had opportunities to win that job, and they have not done it. Steven Gonzalez, I thought, looked a little bit flat-footed last week. Really, Brendan Mann and Ryan Bates are your bright spots, I would say, in some way, shape, or form on the offensive line. And there's just nothing very continuous at this point. You can't get 5 guys out there working together, even though that's exactly what Joe Moorhead and James Franklin would like to do. That's my biggest disappointment of the year. Without comment.
No, I was actually just thinking today Franklin came out and said, somebody asked him if they were going to be making any changes over the bye week with their offensive line, and he said nothing as of now. We're going to keep working with the unit. Interesting to note that Chaz Wright has been a little banged up. He did not play in the Iowa game. I think he was very limited in Indiana and then also in Northwestern.
Yep.
I know he had his ankle apparently has been bothering him, and Will Fries did some good things. He did, and but it is kind of frustrating because
is he physical enough?
I don't you don't know. He's only a redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's got the size and the potential, but is he ready now? Is a great
right.
Chaz Wright's 6'7", 360 probably. So I mean, I'd like to think he's physical enough, and
he's physical. We would have no problem. He would have no problem pacing us.
Exactly, but we're also not the defensive lines they're going to be seeing in a couple weeks. With that being said, this I think is the biggest offensive line from left to right in college football, and they're up there with the pros too in terms of size. So I just hope that it is frustrating, but hopefully it's something they can work out. And you have to remember, this is still a very young unit.
Yep.
I mean, you're going left. Bates is a redshirt sophomore. He's played a lot of football for us. At left guard is Gonzalez, redshirt sophomore. Center is McGovern, true sophomore, who was a guard last year.
Yeah. You're right. I didn't give McGovern enough
guard,
credit. He's done a nice job.
And right guard is Mann, who he's used to playing tackle too, but I think they like Bates out at the left, and they obviously I
think he's starting to get comfortable at the guard spot.
Yeah,
too.
And he's a 5th-year senior, and then you either have Wright, a redshirt junior, or Fries, a redshirt freshman. So I mean, it's still kind of a young line, and maybe they're just trying to gel. I think this bye week's going to be big for them. I think we'll know a lot next week against a very difficult Michigan defense. Not so much the offense being difficult in Ann Arbor, what they're throwing out there on the field, especially in that monsoon last week. But it's going to be a great test to see really how Penn State improved over the bye week, because that's really what bye weeks are for, is to get healthy and improve. And I think this bye week came at the perfect spot for this team.
There it is. Oh man, the cliche bye came at the right time. Love that. I mean, it did in this particular case, especially leading into the upcoming schedule. So we'll kind of leave that where it is right now. We have a lot more coming for you here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report. Without a game to preview next week, you teased Michigan a little bit, but we'll do that in depth next week. Talk about John O'Korn, and we'll have a better update on Wilton Spate. Doesn't look like Penn State will see him. And, of course, we'll talk about that phenomenal and very young front seven that the Wolverines have to offer. But right now, let's take a little bit of a sideways turn here before we get to the top 10. Tyler, I was out in Gainesville, Florida last week, as some may know of following me on social media and the whatnot, all the different applications that are out there. Still trying to figure out all of them myself. And no Snapchat or Instagram, not anytime soon. But it was a great time out there, man. Gainesville is a really special place. We just picked the game and went and decided to get on a plane and fly down to Gainesville, see what else college football had to offer. It was my first SEC game. I really enjoyed it. And as you may know, Tom Petty was a Gainesville native, and I mentioned at the top of the show here as well, some viral videos from the game and from I Won't Back Down at the end of the third quarter. So let's see if we can get to Tom Petty and that right now. I don't know if that's going or not. No, it's not. Well, everything's going according to plan here. There we go. There it is at the Swamp. Tom Petty, I Won't Back Down. They forgot the words from time to time. It's a good thing they had it overlaid on the screen there, Tyler. But what a great atmosphere there. And here comes the drop here in just a few seconds. Yep, so there you go. That's Tom Petty, live and in person from Florida, and we'll put up a couple pictures from my time in Florida as well as we chat about it. But really, the Swamp, a gorgeous, gorgeous stadium. Great people down there, Tyler. I think you said you had the opportunity to be down there once, but
not for a game.
But
game. I was there. I was actually on the field. The stadium's wide open. It is a beautiful campus, beautiful stadium, nice stadium, like really close. It seems like really close to the field. The action.
Yep.
It looks like in the pictures you're right on top of it.
And there's our picture from the USA soccer game as well
stuff.
in Orlando. Big 4-0 win over Panama.
Nice. And if you don't mind me asking, Bob, for our viewers out there, what was the atmosphere like? If you could compare it to an atmosphere of I guess we can go with either a night game or a 3:30 Big Ten game at home for Penn State for our viewers that have been to Beaver Stadium before.
Yeah, I'll say this. I don't believe that it was quite as loud as Beaver Stadium. Now, I also think that has something to do with Florida's record and the fact that there's a little bit of, I don't know if the word is apathy when it comes to Jim McElwain and his staff. Love the Gators there in the shop as well. I don't know if it's apathy specifically, but I don't believe that they believe in what Jim McElwain is doing down there. So I think you did see and hear some of that. In fact, we had the opportunity to tailgate with some folks that have been tailgating there since 1982, which is absolutely unbelievable and much older than I am, so I give them credit for that. But I thought, and they said as much, that there weren't as many people tailgating as normal. We got there at about 11:30 for a 3:30 game. We actually wanted to get there a lot earlier, but we had to drop our rental car back at the airport. We had driven to Orlando the night before, and there was almost nobody there. Now, the quality was there, Tyler. Almost everybody that was set up had multiple TVs, a satellite dish. They were watching College Game Day on one screen, and they had ESPNU getting ready for the game on the other screen because I believe that's where Georgia and Vanderbilt were playing at high noon, and it was unbelievable there, the spreads and everything else, but there just weren't that many people that were tailgating. And if my man Fred Dorr from down there is watching, thanks again for having us. It was unbelievable to be with you, and you guys put on a great party and a great show. But it was different. It was significantly different. There's not the wide, expansive grass fields that you see at Penn State. In fact, the sorority and fraternity houses are right by the stadium, so a vast majority of the student tailgating is actually done there. And there's one fairly large lot for alums, and then there's just kind of nooks and crannies throughout campus that people park at.
Well, yeah, I know
Oddly enough.
and the stadium's in the middle of campus too. Unlike Penn State, it's kind of on the corner there of campus, so there's plenty more room, obviously there. And I think you mentioned something pretty funny. That at least I thought it was funny about the way that where they have their alumni sit and where they have the students sit. So if you don't mind, share that with the audience.
Well, as you know, as many of the folks know watching this, the 3:30 SEC game is really the slot to be. If you're a SEC power, that's the game of the week. That's where Vern Lundquist has been calling games forever and ever. So at that point in the day, the sun is creeping behind the one sideline. And unlike Beaver Stadium, where they have press boxes and luxury boxes lining both sides of the sideline, it's only the one. So this vast press box stretches high over the one sideline, and the alumni sit directly in front of that so that the sun is completely blocked from them, and they're in the nice shade as we get into October, and I'm sure it was a nice afternoon sitting in the shade. The students, on the other hand, coming half or fully sloshed from the sorority and fraternity houses, they sit out in the baking humidity, the hot sun, 90-some degrees. On the one sideline, they're great seats. They're better seats than Penn State actually offers, but they actually they have to deal with quite a lot of sunlight and heat. I'm sure that doesn't help. I happen to be in the restroom in between one of the two quarters. I heard a little splat behind me. What's that? It was a kid that couldn't hold on long enough to get into the stall.
Hopefully he makes it to the shady side one day if he can
hopefully
get through.
So.
He might be a 5-year type of guy if he keeps that up, but best of luck to him.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So a little bit of my time down there at Florida. Big shout out once again to our friends Fred Dorr and his tailgating squad who put on a great show for us. Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus, for those of you just joining us live on Facebook Live or on Twitter. This is the Nittany Lion Sports Report. You can catch us every week, and we normally do this on Mondays, but we're doing this here on Tuesday night, and you can catch all our videos archived on YouTube as well. All right, top 10. The top 10 rankings came out. Now we have a couple weeks till we get the official CFP rankings, but let's go through it here. The top 10, Alabama, Clemson, 1-2, no change. Out of the Big 12, Oklahoma drops a 38-31 game. Iowa State was 31-point dogs going into that 12 o'clock kick on the road at Oklahoma. Wow.
Wow is right. I was actually watching that game. I was watching Penn State versus Northwestern, and then I saw the score come across the bottom, and it was slowly Iowa State started to come back, and you're like, all right, well, Oklahoma's going to pull away, Baker Mayfield, they're going to pull away. Next thing you know, they're down by 8. They score a touchdown, they go for 2, they get it. It's 24-24. And then Iowa State scores to take the lead, 31-24. Then Oklahoma scores 31-31, and then next thing you know, this Iowa State player makes a great catch for a game-winning touchdown, and then they stop Baker Mayfield to win the game. I mean, I kept getting the feeling that, all right, this is going to be his Heisman moment, even though it's against Iowa State. He's going to lead them down the field. The rest is history type of thing. But somehow Iowa State, who's not a very good football team, sorry if there's any Cyclones out there watching, I kind of doubt it. They're just not a very good football team.
Okay.
And somehow and they had a new quarterback in that game too.
They did.
It's just unbelievable to go into Oklahoma and do that to the third-ranked Sooners.
Can I just offer a quick counter there?
Sure.
All right. So the Iowa Hawkeyes go to Ames and win a double overtime game 44-41.
In-state rivalry.
In-state rivalry. Okay. Penn State beat Pitt by 19. All right. So then Michigan State beats Iowa in a really close game, and all of a sudden you're thinking, man, this Iowa team is not that good. Penn State barely beat them. Yes, it was on the road, but what's going on? Mm-hmm. This weekend, Michigan State, whose only loss was to Notre Dame, who's now looking like a very good team, their only loss, a 1-point loss to Georgia, who's vaulting into the top 5. Michigan State then beats Michigan on the road, and Iowa State beats Oklahoma. So now Iowa, in my estimation, looks a heck of a lot better than they did in times prior. And with only 2 losses, they really weren't beaten badly by anybody. Obviously, Penn State, they took them to the absolute wire. Michigan State now, with that 1 loss to Notre Dame, as I mentioned before. I think those 2 results, Michigan State, Michigan, and Iowa State versus Oklahoma, actually changes the lens through which we view all of the surrounding teams related to those 2 teams, Iowa, and in some ways even Penn State now. So maybe Iowa State is not as bad a team as you think, sitting at 3-2, a loss to what I think is now a better Iowa team and a win against the number 3 team in the country on the road.
You may be right about Iowa State maybe not being as bad as I interpret them to be, but I think it's just college football. I think it's just what makes it great. It's any week anything can happen. 31-point dogs on the road, the top 3 team, and you win by 7. I mean, it doesn't matter how much you win by. You won the game. I mean, it's incredible. I think though, when do you draw the line? When you say, all right, well, they beat them, who beat them, and they lost. Does that not? So does this maybe not make?
You're right.
Does this maybe not make Ohio State? Does this maybe even hurt their chances now looking at it? I mean, I know they still have to play Penn State, and a lot of football has to be played.
And Michigan, so they can rectify the ship.
And they're lost, but they lost to Oklahoma, who then lost to Iowa State. So does that hurt Ohio State? I mean, it's just, it's like a trickle-down effect or a trickle-up effect, depending on which way you look at it.
Yep.
So it's something definitely interesting to look at. I mean, we'll have a better feel on Halloween when the college football playoff rankings come out, and that's, of course,
and after the Penn State
Ohio State game.
Yep.
So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, halfway point for Penn State, but a lot of football to be played, and I'm sure that the committee's going to have their hands full because I only see maybe Alabama going undefeated out of all the teams. I think there's going to be a lot of one-loss teams fighting for 3 spots.
Okay, who's Clemson losing to?
Let me pull up their schedule.
Miami in the title game?
Could be. I think a game to watch here for Clemson is actually at NC State.
I knew it. I knew it.
November 4th. NC State had that first loss of the year to South Carolina, and came down to the wire. But NC State, for the viewers out there, they pretty much did they lose on
19 I think starters, right?
Well, no. NC State last year at Clemson. Either Clemson kicked the game-winning field goal as time expired.
That's right.
Or
they missed it.
Or NC State missed it. One or the other. It was so they took Clemson to the wire last year at Clemson, and NC State. I saw them play last Thursday against Louisville, and this defensive line is very impressive. They have Clemson at home.
And they return everybody from last year's team.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a big part of the reason.
So that would be the one game to watch for. And looking at their schedule, outside of that, it's pretty much a cakewalk at Syracuse on Friday. I mean, and then they have Florida State, who obviously isn't what we thought they were at the beginning of the season. Clemson hosts Florida State, and then they go to South Carolina to finish the year in an in-state rivalry. And then they have the ACC Championship, which will probably be against Miami. Looking ahead, obviously, still have 6 games left. But I mean, I guess against what you said, Clemson could probably has a second best chance outside Alabama to go undefeated.
Okay. So the rest of that top 10, Penn State then comes in at number 3, Georgia at number 4, Washington 5, TCU 6, Wisconsin 7, and Wazoo, the Washington State Huskies. I'm sorry, not the Huskies, the
Cougars.
Cougars. Thank you very much. At number 8. What an idiot.
Rookie.
Number 9. Here's where I start having issues. I'm actually okay with the top 8 as the undefeated teams in that order. Number 9, Ohio State. Number 10, Auburn. Number 11, Miami. This is in the AP. Number 12, Oklahoma. Number 13, Southern Cal. Number 14, Oklahoma State. Number 15, Virginia Tech. Number 16, Notre Dame. Number 17, Michigan. And all the way down at number 21 is the Michigan State Spartans. So I won't do the transitive property with you, Tyler, I swear. We'll get past that. Let's talk head-to-head. Oklahoma beat Ohio State. They're ranked 3 spots behind them. Michigan State beat Michigan. They're 4 spots behind them. Each of those teams has the same number of losses in the loss column as the other. I know the rankings don't matter right now, but what? Are you kidding me?
I think it's kind of a what have you done for me lately? And the committee has said it before. They said it's better.
Okay, I'll tell you. Michigan State?
But they say it's better to lose. If you're going to lose early. That's what Ohio State did that 2014 season when they went on. They lost at home to Virginia Tech week 2. Same week they lost to Oklahoma, and they ran the table for the rest of the year. I think, it is hard to say. I mean, Michigan dropped 10 spots. I mean, they looked awful. I mean, the game, granted, was played in really bad conditions, but there's no excuse for me because I don't really think that Michigan State is that talent. I think they have talent. They're a lot better, improved than they were last year, but they don't have as much talent as Michigan. I don't even think it's really that close. Michigan's very young, but
both those teams lose home games. Ohio State and Michigan both lose at home. And these other teams with the same amount of losses, Michigan State with a more recent win and Michigan with the most recent loss, ranked 4 spots ahead. I just can't. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Which one bothers you the most?
Michigan State.
Do you think they're ranked too high, too low?
Michigan and Michigan State somehow need to be flip-flopped.
You think they should be flip-flopped? Okay.
I mean, Michigan State comes to Ann Arbor.
So then you put Michigan State at like 17 right behind Notre Dame since they lost to Notre Dame?
I'm glad you asked. I actually re-ranked for you 9 on. So instead of Ohio State,
you agree with 9, the top 8?
Top 8 I'm good with right now. Number 9, Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma still, they came from number 3. They had the best win, and I'm willing to keep them up there. Number 10, Auburn. I think they had, at that point, we'll say the best loss, an 8-point loss to Clemson. Number 11, Notre Dame. I think they had the second best loss, which was to a 1-point loss to Georgia. Then I have Ohio State. Then I have Southern Cal. I'm actually somewhat impressed by that loss. Not impressed by the loss, but I'll certainly accept it against Washington State. Luke Falk looks very, very good. He showed spurts last year and now is actually vaulting himself into a back-end Heisman campaign. Miami, I have at 14. No losses yet. I just haven't seen enough from them. So
played 4 games, too, because of the hurricane.
That's right. Great point there. Oklahoma State, 15. Michigan State, 16. And Michigan, 17.
I can't really...
Virginia Tech dropped back. They were number 15. I don't see it there.
And I guess it's a good thing our opinions don't matter, and it comes down to October 3rd. And this ranking won't even legitimately matter too much when the college football playoff rankings come out. I do think, some people, you see Ohio State kind of still floating around, and people saying, oh, they're starting to look good. But I look at their last 4 games, which they look good. They beat Army 38-7. They beat UNLV 54-21, blew out Rutgers 56-0, and then blew out Maryland, who's on our third-string quarterback 62-14. So, I do kind of see what you're saying, having a tough time putting them ahead of Oklahoma. Yeah, they won their last 4 games since losing Oklahoma, and I'm not saying that Penn State has played the toughest schedule and that Ohio State hasn't, but I do think I agree with you that Oklahoma definitely should be above Ohio State still.
Yeah. So that was kind of my thought there. And when it comes to the discussions regarding the top 10, comes down to the college football playoff, I find that it'll be extremely interesting. I always do. I usually have some sort of significant issue and do a radio show about it. So maybe this year we'll do a video show about no more Kirby Hocutt to get on and no more Jeff Long to get upset with, but we'll have to find a new victim.
For sure.
You've never been part of one of these, have you? One of my rippings?
I have not. I'm kind of afraid.
Are you afraid?
I wish Eric was here to protect me.
Yeah, there you go.
If you're watching, Eric, you might not want to come back.
I mean, I remember the year where, again, Ohio State, they went out there and they earned it when they were given the opportunity. But, you had that Baylor and TCU fiasco. I mean, that was handled so brutally. And I said it at the time. I'll say it again and then stop myself so that we don't do this for another 2 hours. But the the College Football Playoff Committee had one difficult decision to make. Alabama and Oregon were locks. Florida State was undefeated. So you had one legitimate choice to make, and you had 3 teams to choose from: TCU, Baylor, and Ohio State. And what happens after we tell 12 people that we're going to have them go do this and say, go watch every football game? What decision do they come to? Well, because the Big 12 doesn't have a college football championship game for their conference, and because they can't decide on 1-2 champion, we're going to pick Ohio State. I mean, are you kidding me? Let's just let the computers do it, or let's just do it on brand name and recognition. Good for Ohio State for taking that opportunity and winning the national championship that year, but that was a joke. And when it comes to brand recognition and people saying, well, the Ohio State calls, the Duke calls in basketball, the rankings with teams like that, that's where it comes from. Things like that. I don't know if I necessarily, I guess to some extent I buy into it, but whether that was the reason for that is not or not, and even whether that was the right decision, the way they came to it was an absolute joke.
Let me pose a question to you. I'm looking at the rankings here.
All right, let's see it.
And Oklahoma dropped 9, Michigan dropped 10, lost both games at home. Obviously, Oklahoma's opponent was weaker than Michigan's opponent. They both drop about, we'll just say 10 spots. If Penn State, I guess we're coming up on 2 weeks from now, goes to Ohio State, plays a very tough game, loses by a touchdown or less, how much does that drop them out? Because you're going on the road against a top 10 team, even though Penn State should be ranked higher going into that game if they take care of business against Michigan. Sure. How far would they drop out, and how far would Ohio State then move up? I mean, I guess it also depends on the teams in between them, but hypothetically.
If Ohio State beats Penn State, the Buckeyes should be ranked ahead of Penn State.
And then how far?
I believe that. I really do.
If Penn State loses by 7 or less, or does it not? Do you think does it not matter how much they lose by?
No, it matters.
It does. So
I think it does.
If it's a closer game, how far do you see them dropping?
I don't think Penn State would drop all that far. I mean, so this is the thing I struggled with last year, right? And I think a lot of Michigan fans struggled with it. Beating Wisconsin and beating Penn State, and both of those teams found their way into the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State also beat Wisconsin. So by virtue of the Badgers being in the other division, with 2 losses, they found their way to the title game. So, how far do they drop? Well, does Penn State drop behind Wisconsin? Do they drop behind Washington State, who doesn't really have another absolutely top tier game on the schedule until they get to Washington? That's a tough question to ask. I think they'd fall right in line with Wazoo. Maybe they would fall into the 8-9 spot. And again, it all depends on what happens with Georgia over the next couple weeks.
Which would also give them time to climb back up because last year, the first college football playoff, I think they came in at 12, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And that was
now they won every game.
Right. And I mean, looking at Wisconsin's schedule, we were talking earlier about teams that have the best chance to go undefeated. Might be Wisconsin.
I would agree.
I mean, they play one ranked team all year, and that is Michigan. And Michigan might not even be ranked when they play them. I mean, so.
Yeah? You really think it's that big of an issue in Ann Arbor?
Their offense is a huge issue, yes. And I'll talk about that a little more next week. I think their defense is elite, and
I would agree.
People keep saying the Michigan defense for the Big Ten. I'm not even so sure they're the best defense in the Big Ten. But Wisconsin's schedule, I think the Big Ten East champion will be Penn State or Ohio State. It very well may come down to that game in the Horseshoe on the 28th. The winner ultimately will play Wisconsin from the West, and I think whoever wins the East will go on the win just because they've been battle-tested the whole season, and Wisconsin has not been tested quite like the East will be.
The only thing to say there is that Michigan still controls their own destiny.
They do.
And if they could get like a Wilton Spate back in time for the Penn State game.
I think he's out for the year.
Out for the year now.
I think I heard that today.
That came out today? Okay.
Let me look that up.
Yeah, sure. Well, assuming that's the case, it's John O'Korn's team, I suppose, and that's been a struggle at this point. And whether not Wisconsin, but if Michigan can find a way to win those two games, obviously their one loss would be against Michigan State. Now, I guess that could become interesting. Could you have a four-way tie if all the right things happen? 2 losses for Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. If nobody drops a game outside of the division and they all beat each other, you could have a 4-way tiebreak. I don't know if Michigan State's to that level quite yet, but Penn State will be seeing them in Spartan Stadium
after
a game against Michigan and Ohio State in successive weekends.
To follow up on Wilton Spate, it said I was reading it on the forums, which isn't the most accurate way of news, but right now it's multiple weeks with cracked. I believe it's a collarbone.
Okay.
So I expect him. He will not be ready in my estimation for Penn State, which helps Penn State because John O'Korn just doesn't have the same really anything. He might be a little bit more mobile than Spate and was able to make some good plays against Purdue.
Yep.
But Wilton Spate, I'd be surprised actually if he came back at all this season, frankly. But a question for you, Bob. Last year, we were obviously all pretty irate that Penn State didn't get into the playoff. 11-2, Big Ten champs, beat Ohio State. That second loss obviously really hurt them, the loss to Pittsburgh. Is there any maybe any silver lining here that maybe Ohio State goes 11-1? Or
no chance
that Penn State would get in if they didn't win the Big Ten. If they went 11-1, didn't have a chance to play for the Big Ten.
Not over Ohio State.
So Ohio State would have to lose another Big Ten game.
Now, here is the thing, right? If they lost another Big Ten game, they would still, in theory, have a tiebreak over Penn State. Again, we're talking about the exact same story here.
Right.
Except you wouldn't go to the head-to-head tiebreaker because if they lost another game, say to Michigan, and then Michigan lost another game. Well, now Penn State has 1 loss in conference to Ohio State. Ohio State has 2 losses overall. I guess they'd have to have
one would be Oklahoma.
No, so they would have to.
What I'm saying is
so you're saying
that they could be what Penn State was last year,
winning the tiebreak and the head-to-head. I'm sorry, the head-to-head because they would each have 1 loss in conference. Go to the championship game with 2 losses and win.
A lot of football to be played, though. I don't even want to start thinking about that yet.
Pittsburgh is not Oklahoma.
No, they are not.
And I think that would be the difference.
It was on the road, and it was a totally different team when we played Pittsburgh last year, but Ohio State could say the same thing about Oklahoma. So I just don't know. I mean, obviously.
When it came down to the discussion between Penn State and Washington, though.
That was actually more because Washington's out of conference schedule. And it would have been like Pittsburgh being substituted for Villanova.
Right.
And no disrespect to Villanova. But
I'm disrespected.
But Washington played Portland State out of conference when we at least tested ourselves with a young team.
Okay.
And obviously we didn't know we'd have the injuries we were going to have at that point of the year, where we could have played Villanova at home. Even if it was away, we wouldn't. I mean, but it's.
But you remember how that discussion went, though. It's okay. Would Washington have a loss to Pittsburgh?
We may never know.
Well, we definitely won't know. But what the committee came to, I think, was that it was enough to overlook because it wasn't a ranked team. Now, Pittsburgh did have two of the best wins in the entire football landscape last year, with a road win at Clemson and then a home win against a Penn State team that ended up being a top 5 team in the country. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, that was the dynamics of that discussion last year. Personally, completely unbiased as much as I can be, I did not have a problem with the 4 teams that went to the playoff last year. I really did not. When you have 12 games in the regular season and maybe a 13th data point, having one additional loss is such a big deal. It's not like you're playing an 82-game basketball season.
Yeah.
Having the difference in strengths of schedule. Even 30-some game basketball schedule like you see at the college level, and having to manage those records differently, Gonzaga versus Kentucky versus Villanova versus Arizona.
Right. It's just a tough pill to swallow, and I'm sure
yes,
it was tough for the team to swallow more than really the fans, because you go out there and you beat Ohio State, and then you win the Big Ten. You beat a very good Wisconsin team in the Big Ten championship, and then Ohio State's sitting at home, and who helped you really get to the Big Ten championship game by losing to Michigan, by beating Michigan. I'm sorry.
Yep.
And then Penn State obviously taking care of business against Michigan State, which got them to Indianapolis. So I mean, it was hard for Penn State fans to take, and I'm sure it was even harder for the team. Hopefully, that's something that they don't even let the committee make any decision like that. Hopefully, they take care of business these next 1 week at a time. And hopefully that it doesn't come down to that, and they control their own destiny.
This is the number of losses that Penn State has. This is the single most important thing in the world.
Just win
right now. Win the next game.
It's great not having to worry right now about really what other teams are doing.
Yep.
And I hope because that's what we had to do last year. I hope they lose, and I hope they beat them somehow, and control your own destiny, and that's all you can hope for.
Tyler, it's 7:58, man. We've been doing this on Facebook Live here for the last 58 minutes, as well as on Twitter and, of course, on Ustream, as we always do. We were talking about the bye week. We were not going to be able to get to an hour. We didn't have a guest. Thanks again to Greg Mraz, who came on last week and talked Northwestern. There's no Michigan to preview.
We're going two hours next week.
There you go.
Right? Yeah.
Tune in. Tune in. Block out your Monday nights. So, Tyler, any further thoughts and any last tidbits of wisdom for our new Facebook friends that are joining us here tonight?
Actually, I actually really don't have anything. If you're new to watching us, thank you for joining. Like Bob said earlier, we're usually on Monday nights at 8. We will probably be, I'm sure we'll be back on next Monday.
Looking forward to it. We'll get a Michigan correspondent on and break down everything that is the Wolverines.
I'm trying to see here if there's any exciting games this week. A game that I think could actually be pretty interesting at noon on Saturday is TCU at Kansas State.
Okay.
If you're not doing anything Saturday at noon, I would definitely tune into FS1. Kansas State is a very well-coached team. They're at home against TCU, coming off a very hard-fought win against West Virginia. College game day was there, a lot of excitement in Fort Worth. I think that I would put TCU on upset alert at Kansas State, and that would even rattle the Big 12 and the College Football Committee already.
Yes, it would, leading to hopefully a 3-way tie in a divisionless conference, and they would have to pick one of them to go to the championship game. Oh, that would be so much fun. Oh, I would have so much fun.
Sit back and
with
watch.
That. Just watch it all fall apart. All right, well, my final comment is, once again, I appreciate everybody joining us on the new mediums here. If you haven't really seen us or watched us in the past, hopefully we can become a part of your Monday evenings, and, of course, we'll post these on YouTube. We can become a part of your night any time that you choose to listen. We also have podcasted all the other episodes on YouTube, so go check that out. And we'll also have some live football on here in the next couple of weeks for LaSalle College High School as we broadcast out here on BLS as well. But for Tyler Gehlhaus, my name is Bob Long, saying so long here from Philadelphia, and thanks for joining us here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report. We'll see you soon.